Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Beyond Horizons. We just watched the return of the old crew of the Beluga as well as the tourists that we sent in the last episode. So Megan and Seepond and the rest of their crew will be taking a much needed holiday. Moving on to today's episode, we have a transfer window for Eve pretty imminently, so we are constructing our big ship to go there. Now, this will be completely autonomous because, well, frankly, I don't want to risk any more Kerbal's lives to the throes of stellar radiation. This ship will be called the Orpheus and will carry with it 4 landing probes, 3 of which will be destined for the surface of Eve and 1 of which will be destined to go to Gilly. And of course, the probes are each called Eurydice because the ship will fail to retrieve them from the surface of Eve, which could be considered an underworld-like hellscape. Yes, we love a good literary reference in our spacecraft, and there we are just deploying it out of the fairing, which leaves a pretty beautiful star pattern behind it. Yeah, so Eve is obviously the analog for Venus in the game of Kerbal Space Program, and there are a lot of interesting things about that planet. For example, it's thought to not have any tectonic plates, but rather a singular shell that spans the entire planet, which floats around on the mantle and moves about. And because there are no tectonic plates, there aren't any relieving points for all the pressure that builds up inside, and that results in quite a lot of volcanic activity. There's roughly around 85,000 volcanoes on the surface, though we're not sure what percentage of those are active. And the entire surface itself is only roughly 300 to 600 million years old, which is very young for a terrestrial planet. This is the smoking gun, so to speak, of large volcanic activity because there's lots of volcanic eruptions, which means there's a constant refreshing of the surface rocks. There is also more deuterium than you'd expect to find in its atmosphere. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, and this could kind of suggest that maybe there was once water on the surface of Venus. Through a process called photodissociation, the radiation from the sun kind of breaks apart water molecules into deuterium and other products, and that's how you'd end up with it in the atmosphere. And of course, you'd have to have water on the surface to begin with for that to occur. Now, we're just taking a quick look at the lander probes. So for our Eve landers, they've got a little deorbit stage, and then they'll use parachutes the rest of the way, and there are lots of atmospheric experiments to do on the surface. And for the Gilly probe, we're going to use an engine, and it's going to take so long because of the low gravity on that tiny little rock. Moving swiftly on, we turn our attention straight to the drive module of the Orpheus. I'm not sure why I decided to launch the drive module second. I think I was a bit worried about the off-center center of mass with the probes on the main module there, so I figured it might be a little easier to move the fuel tank around rather than that, but I may have been very wrong. I ended up launching at a bad time, and I had to wait quite a few orbits. I think in game time it took about 3 days, so yeah, it wasn't the most convenient rendezvous I've ever done. Seems to be a bit of a running theme for this series that I'm making my life a lot harder than it needs to be, but you know, I've been playing this game for, well, probably about 10 years now, so I don't want to just do easy rocket launches anymore. I want to do big, difficult projects and push myself. Going back to what I was saying about Venus not having any tectonic plates, this is actually an area of debate. Some scientists say that there is tectonic plates, although that they wouldn't be anything like the Earth's, and some say that there aren't any tectonic plates at all and that it's a single shell. I think the general consensus is that there is just one big shell, but again, it's an area of debate. Venus is obviously famous for its runaway greenhouse effect, which makes it the hottest place on average in the solar system other than the sun. Yes, even hotter than Mercury, because Mercury doesn't really have an atmosphere to cook itself with. So when you consider that alongside the presence of deuterium in the atmosphere, it's not a leap to assume that maybe Venus started out somewhat like Earth with liquid oceans and rivers and all that. The heavy amount of volcanic activity would have been constantly spewing carbon dioxide into the air, and as we know, that is a greenhouse gas, eventually cooking the planet and making it hotter and hotter. And with that rise in temperature, the water starts to evaporate, reaching higher and higher altitudes, where it is more exposed to radiation from the sun, which encourages the acceleration of the photodissociation process, which leads to all of that deuterium. All of that is heavily up for debate. Like I said, if Venus does have tectonic plates, then maybe it's slightly different. Maybe it never had water on the surface to begin with, and some other process has caused all of this deuterium to be present in the atmosphere. Anyway, enough yapping about Venus, because we're actually going to Eve. Yes, we're going pretty much straight into a transfer. Now, I spent quite a long time dragging the maneuver node around and trying to get a good encounter. I ended up realizing that the main problem I had was my inclination, as it always is. So I end up making a trajectory that brings me close to Venus, and then I course correct on the way. Yes, unlike Venus, Eve is actually known to have oceans, though I suspect they are not made of water. I mean, it's long been speculated in the Kerbal Space Program community that it's made of some kind of liquid methane or some sort of hydrocarbon. But knowing the bizarre nature of the Kerbal Space Program universe, perhaps it is made of the same stuff as the Mystery Goo experiments. I suppose there's only one way to find out, and we will know when we get there. With any luck, we'll manage to land one of the probes in the ocean and, yeah, get our probe to have a sample of the stuff. A sample, of course, that we could never return due to Eve having such high gravity and such a thick atmosphere, which makes it very difficult to leave the surface once you're there. But there we are, the Orpheus is on its way to Eve, and we will check back in for a course correction in a few weeks. While we wait for the Valkyrie and Orpheus missions to get to their respective destinations, we're not actually producing a whole lot of science. Of course, we have had the pod lander and the beluga collecting some surface science from the moon, but it's not very much because there's only a few experiments available to us in that regard. So I thought I'd send a quick little mission out to Minmus. And as you've just seen me set up here, I brought along quite a few of the surface experiments. Now, I've used these a few times before. I can't say I've used them a lot, and I'm not sure if the Kerbalism mod has changed how they work in any way. So I have also brought some of these surface experiments along to Juna, but I realise if I don't know how they work before they get there, they're not going to be much use. Yeah, so as well as adding all the life support and difficulties of space radiation, the Kerbalism mod also changes how science works in the game. It makes it a lot harder to spam science. It makes it a bit more realistic, and something like a mystery goo experiment or material studies, you actually have to either return the sample or bring it to a science lab and analyze it there. You can't just transmit that science. Yeah, as with any mod that tries to implement some realism, it makes the game a bit harder. My biggest gripe is that the mystery goo and material studies experiments are no longer biome specific, so you can do one in high space, one in low space, and one anywhere on the surface, which I think's a bit unfair. I think that's unnecessarily harsh, but I tried to have a look in the config files to see if I could change that, but I don't really understand it well enough to do that, so unfortunately I'm just going to have to put up with it. And here you see me jumping to another biome. I figured if we're just doing one round trip to Minmus, we might as well go to as many biomes as possible and collect all of the science. I wanted to perhaps bring the beluga to Minmus and then repeat the process of sending the pod down and collecting all the biome science, but unfortunately beluga is actually out of fuel now, so I'm going to have to refuel it. I think I might just leave it there. And what I'll do instead with Minmus is construct some kind of surface base instead, and so we can have like a little rover maybe that hops around, or, well, not a rover because rovers are quite slow, but if I build like a little, I don't know, some sort of shuttle to go around all the different biomes in Minmus and bring them back to a centralized base to analyze all the science. I think that could be a fun little project to work on. Yeah, rovers in the Kerbal Space Program aren't very appealing to do because it takes so long to get anywhere on a rover. There used to be a mod called Bon Voyage, so you would send a rover down to the surface, tell it where you wanted it to drive to, and then it would do that in the background and you wouldn't have to do that yourself. And I honestly think that should be part of the stock game, because otherwise rovers are just really difficult to do anything with, and especially with somewhere like Minmus where the gravity is so low, you can just send like a shuttle to hop around to the other side of the planet for virtually no fuel at all. It's a lot easier, so I have never really made too many rovers in the game. Of course I've made a few because it's always fun to kind of recreate Curiosity or something like that, but generally I avoid them. As we get further and further into this playthrough, I have been thinking about what my long-term goal, or my end point of this playthrough should be. I was thinking maybe go for like the tourism route, and maybe my end point should be like get functional hotels around all of the major bodies in the Kerbal system, but I don't think that's hugely realistic, because say somewhere like Jewel, first of all, it is swarming with radiation and isn't actually a very safe environment. But also it takes years to get out there, and I'm not really sure whether people would, in real life, give away 10 years of their life to do a cruise out to somewhere like Jupiter, just to stay in a hotel. That seems a bit silly, but I'm not sure. I think at the very least I want to have visited every single body in the Kerbal system, either by probe or by crew, and then maybe from there I can see what sort of goal I should set myself. But if you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, the future can wait, because more importantly right now we have just finished our last landing here on Minmus, and we're getting ready to head back to Kerbin. Corvid will reach its periaps around Kerbin in a few days, but in the meantime, the flower has finally returned home. After a year and 194 days in deep space, it is time to bring them back. I didn't do any kind of course correction before getting to Kerbin, so you can see we're in this nasty polar orbit, so getting them back is going to be a pain, but they are finally home, so we'll be sending a rescue mission in the next episode to go and collect them. And to finish off this episode, we will watch the return of Corvid. And with the Corvid's safe return, it is time to close today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to catch up with older episodes, you can check out the playlist that this is in. But I've been Moonfish1001, and I will see you in the next video.